Thank you all for being here. So I think what I'll do is just talk a little bit about why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I was thinking about today because I've been reading Lester Brown. Are any of you familiar with Lester Brown? He's been a long-time environmental activist with World Watch Institute, Earth Policy Institute. He's come out with a new version of his book and basically is saying we have the matter of a couple of years here to get our act together on climate change, or it's going to be too late. And just an analogy I give to people, which is probably going to keep you awake tonight, but I'll give it to you anyway. When I was in high school, I had my life nicely mapped out, and I was, I had a good life. I was a good athlete. I was a leader in my church group, and I had all kinds of plans. And then on a football field in Anoka, I had my left leg ripped out of its hip socket, and it landed over my right shoulder, and it stayed there. And from that point on, my plans changed. I was told I was going to be in a body cast. I might have my leg amputated. I might never walk again. And what I want to say to us is that whether we know it or not, each of us we've had both of our legs ripped out of their hip sockets. And so whatever plans we've had, we can't continue with those plans. So the first leg that got ripped out that we didn't count on was we're dealing with the worst administration in U.S. history. I really believe that. This is the worst administration in U.S. history. And the problems that have been created, the undermining of the democracy, the association of this country with torture, the shredding of the Constitution, the inequality, the denial of global warming, you could add to the list, allying us into a war. We may never recover. We won't recover from this administration unless we mobilize a movement to really take back the country. So that's the first leg that we had ripped out of our hip socket. And the second one is coming from the climate change scientists. And I've been following this issue for a very long time. Jim Hansen, the lead environmental scientist at NASA, he came out about 3 weeks ago, and this is what he said. This should be on the front page of every paper in this country, and it should be on the front page day after day after day after day after day until we get it. And what he said was the environmental scientists have been thinking, well, we've got a decent chance if we can keep carbon emissions below 450 parts per million. But he said the pace of the change now has accelerated so dramatically. If you look at the melting in the Arctic, you look at the Greenland ice sheet, he said that number is not 450. He said he thinks it's 350. And does anybody know where we are? You know if you hear me. We're at 383. So the lead environmental scientist in the country and one of the lead environmental scientists in the world has told us we've already crossed a tipping point. And he doesn't thereby go on and say it's hopeless, but he does go on and say what I've been saying throughout this whole campaign. It is absolutely urgent, and it's moving in the direction of hopeless. So we have to mobilize our resources on a scale similar to what this country did to address World War II, if we're going to have a decent chance for a future. So that's the number one issue that I'm leading with is really climate change. It's not that I don't care about other things, but unless we address that issue with a great deal of urgency, it's going to be too late. And the good news, if there can be any good news in this, is that if we do address it and do it right, there's some opportunity here. But it's going to be an opportunity that comes with a lot of changes. We're going to need to build a renewable energy economy and do it soon. We can build commuter rail lines, and I can go into a litany of a lot of things that we could and should be doing that would be an effective response. But that's one. The second issue, which kind of flows from this, is if you take seriously what I just said, and I hope you do, then what the hell are we doing in Iraq? And how long can we afford to stay there? We are bankrupting this country. We are destroying this country's economy in Iraq. Now, I'll be glad to answer questions, but I'll just make this statement. We have a moral obligation to help Iraq rebuild because of what we've done to that country. But the absolute prerequisite for us helping is to end the occupation of Iraq for very simple reasons. The Bush administration is trying to steal Iraqi oil and put permanent military bases there. Almost no Iraqis want that to happen. So as long as we continue the occupation with those goals, there's going to be an insurgency. And the other reason we have to end the occupation is because no country in the world is going to step in and help the United States. The UN isn't going to help. The international community isn't going to help. Iraq's neighbors aren't going to help the United States achieved those goals of stealing Iraqi oil and putting permanent military bases there. Now, here's where I differ from Al Franken and Mike Cerisi. I'll try to highlight some of those throughout, but here's a big one. I say it's not just about Iraq, although Iraq is bad enough. One day of Iraq war spending, we can hire 9,300 teachers for a year. Now, if you care about education, what's happening in education, just think about that. Day after day after day after day. One day of Iraq war spending, we could hire 9,300 teachers for a year. But it's deeper than that. We have to help this country transition from being this dominant military superpower that seeks its security through unilateral military power to transition to simply be a decent country, a good country that will join the community of nations and partner with the community of nations to address pressing problems. If we don't have our country make that transition, then I just say any politician that promises you, oh, I care about health care, I care about global warming, I care about, education, it's smoke and mirrors, because this country now devotes is responsible for more than half of all world military spending. Military spending is undermining the security of this country. We can talk more about that. So that's a second one. A third one is, related to all this, is I'm running because our country's unraveling. We're headed for a fiscal train wreck. We've got bridges falling down. Our schools are being funded with property taxes. We've got 50 million people without health insurance. We got people bankrupt because of one health emergency. They're losing their homes. And a lot of that is linked to distorted priorities, but it's also linked to another thing that no other candidate really talks about. And that is that we have the highest degree of inequality in this country since the robber baron days. And that's a result of changes in the tax code, that's a result of undermining unions, that's a result of keeping the minimum wage below a living wage, a whole series of things. So that's another urgent issue that we have to deal with, is the fight for equality. So we have to ask ourselves a question. Are we going to continue to pursue public policies based on the elite few's uncommon greed, or are we going to invest in the common good? And I hope that you would join with me in saying we want to invest in the common good. And the last issue that I talk about is we have to stop stealing from future generations. What's the little baby's name again, the little girl?
Violet.
Violet. I see Violet, 2 months old, and I think, poor Violet, if we continue along the roads we are, we're running $800 billion a year trade deficits. That's a theft from Violet and every other young person in this country. To let a president add $3 trillion to the national debt is a theft from Violet. So we have to take the country back, and we have to do it in all the areas that I'm talking about. And the only way that I see us doing that is not by electing Jack Nelson-Pallmeyer to the U.S. Senate. As much as I want that to happen, that's not enough. What we have to do is we have to build a movement together. And we have to build a movement that is strong enough to push this country and move it along in a radically different direction to address all those issues that I talked about. And believe it or not, I'm actually a very hopeful person about where we can go if we have political leadership and a political movement behind that leadership. Now, I said a lot of these things. I say them often at the debates. I was up at International Falls last week, and I'll tell you what I was really excited about. In the aftermath of the debate, like every other debate, more and more people are flocking to my campaign. So message-wise, people are ready to hear this message. But what I was thrilled at is I bet at least 12 or 15 times people coming out, the word they used was, they said, "You're so inspirational. I feel so hopeful. I haven't felt this hopeful about politics in I don't know how many years." And that's after I'm talking about these issues in an honest way. So that's what we have to combine. We have to combine that just honest assessment of where we are and where we're headed with a hopeful vision that we can galvanize people around so that we can take back the country.